Good evening. Today has been, I believe, one of the worst days that we've had in South Africa since the 27th of April 1994, when we held our first democratic elections. Before then, the worst day that we had was when Comrade Chris Hani was assassinated by two right-wingers. But today, the Constitutional Court of a democratic South Africa, a court which should reflect the will of the people, a court which should be sensitive to the pain and the struggle that the people of South Africa have gone through, decided to release the remaining live perpetrator of that murder, of that assassination of Comrade Chris Hani, Janusz Walus. I had to listen to a sanctimonious judgment by Mr. Justice Raymond Zondo, the so-called Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa. I never thought that I would refer to the Chief Justice of South Africa after 1994 as so-called. But that is truly how I feel tonight. I feel that this man, Raymond Zondo, has failed us in every respect, in the way that he handled the Commission of Inquiry into state capture, in the manner that he has dealt with everything surrounding President Jacob Zuma, in the way that he has been appointed even by President Cyril Ramaphosa as the worst candidate at the JC, and yet he got appointed because evidently he was the right man to do the lynch jobs, to do exactly what happened today with this release on parole of Janusz Walus. I listened with absolute pain, deep pain, to the anger and the pain of the widow of Comrade Chris Hani, Comrade Hani, when she said, they don't care at all. And she said, how is it possible that this can be done in a democratic South Africa? And Raymond Zondo wants to come and preach to us about how there should be equality before the law, also to those who have committed the most dastardly acts and who have been the worst perpetrators and pursuers of apartheid. I still remember how Commander Chris Hani was lying in that pool of his own blood in the driveway of his house. I still remember how that assassination brought us to the edge of a civil war in South Africa. I still remember the efforts that have been made by President Nelson Mandela and by some other comrades, the bending over backwards to the white community in order to try and prevent such a civil war, in order to try and repress the anger, the righteous anger of our people. And I must say today, when I was listening to that terrible judgment by Zondo, I regretted that those efforts were made. I was part of those efforts. I took the speech by President Nelson Mandela to the SABC that was broadcasted. We pre-recorded it and then we took it to the SABC. And President Mandela asked the angry people, the angry Black and African people who were outraged by the death of their hero, not to revenge the death of Comrade Chris Hani. He said that the true answer will be for us to have the elections on the 27th of April, 1994, and to build a truly just and democratic South Africa. But of course, today we look back over the more than 28 years that expired since then. And with sadness in our hearts, we must say, we have not built a just society. We have not made sure that there's justice, and especially economic justice, for the majority of Black and African people. Our leadership in the African National Congress have acted exactly in the way that Comrade Chris Hani warned us that they would have acted. He said they're busy selling out. A couple of days before Comrade Chris was assassinated, I was at a meeting with him in Brakpan, and he expressed his deep concern about how the CODESA negotiations was selling out. He expressed his deep concern about the sunset clauses, about the entrenchment of property rights in the interim and even later after his death in the final constitution. He said, I do not want to see an ANC that sells out and where the leaders of the African National Congress consider it to be more important to drive around in luxury Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs than to work for the liberation of our people. A leadership that will consider it more important to fill their pockets with money rather than to serve our people. And of course, those prophetic words by Comrade Chris had become true. And today we see a billionaire president that doesn't care one iota for the people, who is getting rid of Black economic empowerment, who is making sure that our energy security is undermined and destroyed, who sells out the wealth of this country also in the form of coal to the rich nations, making it possible for them to have energy security, while we as a nation is told that we must have so-called renewable energy, which has proved to be entirely unreliable, and that we should do so at the cost of our future, at the cost of our own energy security, that the coal that we put still in those coal-powered fire stations are sub-grade coal, while the highest grade coal is exported through Richards Bay to Western Europe, to Germany, to France, and the United Kingdom. Exactly the kind of things that Comrade Chris Hani warned us against. And I am of the firm opinion that the reason why Comrade Chris was assassinated was exactly because of those sentiments that he expressed. Exactly because he stood up for the rights and for the justice of our people and refused to become one of those who sell out. I'm convinced that those who were eventually charged and found guilty of the assassination of Comrade Chris Hani were not everyone who had been involved, by no means. I'm convinced that there was a much wider network and that it also included senior members of the African National Congress. This conviction that I have, I cannot yet back up with detailed facts, because investigations have been covered up. Information had been destroyed. There was a direct intention to prevent the truth from coming out. And I'm convinced that this decision today by the so-called Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to release Janusz Walus is part of that process of making sure that the cover-up is now 100% and that the truth will never come out. Those are the specifics of this matter. Of course, there's also the general indication of what we are faced with. An esteemed lawyer and a close friend of mine WhatsApped me this afternoon the following two messages. I haven't got his permission to mention his name, but the content of what he sent to me, I believe, is of great importance and that I should read it out tonight. He says, this is a diabolical judgment, and it confirms my view that the Constitutional Court is captured and is in fact being used to dismantle the Liberation Project. He then proceeds, and this is the critical part of his message. It is truly time to review our entire legal system, all of it. It is anti-black and anti-liberation. My dear comrades and friends, I'm speaking tonight with a broken heart, with a deep sense of anger. I'm thinking of all those comrades of mine who have dedicated their lives to the liberation struggle. Those who have sacrificed their youth, like myself, comrades who are still alive, but often are broken people. People who have suffered post-traumatic stress. People who have not garnered for themselves big incomes, huge houses, and fat bank accounts. Who continue to live the dedication for the full liberation of our people. I'm also remembering those who laid down their lives for the liberation struggle, who died in exile, and like Solomon Mahlangu, came back into South Africa and died here fighting for our liberation. Many of them young people, preciously young, who are sacrificing their youth, in fact their whole lives, for our liberation. I remember the young man Vincent Shabalala, who I helped to cross the border into Botswana at a very tender young age, who went for training, became a well-trained operative of Umkhonto we Sizwe, came back into the country, carried out his missions with diligence, but was eventually exposed by a betrayer, by a spy and an agent in Alexandra, and was shot dead in the safe house in that township. The township that he loved, very close to the home of the mother that he loved so dearly. We can tell many other stories. There are so many sacrifices that have been made. There are so many people who, like Solomon Mahlangu said, nurtured the tree of freedom with their blood. And today we face betrayal. We face the slow but sure destruction of the Liberation Project, as my legal friend said, and we cannot allow it. We truly cannot allow this to happen. And that is why I'm speaking out tonight with anger, and I believe that all of us should speak out with anger. And it should be righteous anger, because the lives of our friends and comrades, the lives of our children still to be born and those that are born already, are all being destroyed by this sellout project that has found its culmination now in Cyril Ramaphosa and the sellout National Executive Committee that surrounds him. The man is a criminal. Serious criminal charges have been brought against him. And yet, the police service and the National Prosecuting Authority fails dismally to even do a proper investigation. Almost 6 months after the very detailed charges that Comrade Arthur Fraser brought against Ramaphosa, no charge had been laid against him. We are faced with an independent panel in Parliament that is postponing their decision on whether he has to answer to a prima facie case. And it continues to raise the concern whether they are playing us, whether they are trying to push their final decision beyond the time of the recess of Parliament, so that that decision will have no impact on the upcoming 55th National Conference of the African National Congress. These are the sad realities that we are faced with. But then again today, on this very same day, where Janusz Walus is given a go-free card, where Zondo lectures us about equality before the law, while we have no equality in this country, and while the playing fields have never been leveled, while the majority of Black and especially African people continue to be subjugated to white monopoly capital, continue to be exploited, continue to see their lives being destroyed by the agents of white monopoly capitalism within the African National Congress too, by those comprador capitalists such as Cyril Ramaphosa, Enoch Godongwana, Tito Mboweni, and I can go on and on, that sell out National Executive Committee, that the last NEC meeting of their 5-year term showed absolutely no backbone, could not even get themselves to challenge Ramaphosa for the Phala Phala Farm Gate disaster, for the scandal that it brought over the African National Congress, for the fact that it brought the ANC into disrepute and made our country the laughing stock of the world. So on this very same day, that all of these people have brought together for us this constitutional court judgment to release the killer of Chris Hani. We had to be told by the appeal court that they've rejected the appeal of President Jacob Zuma in the medical parole matter that he brought before them. And we are being told that that court actually believes that President Jacob Zuma should go back to prison. Now that is the sentiment they express. And they dared to express that sentiment on the very same day when Janusz Walus is released. They say a liberation fighter, one of the greatest commanders of Umkhonto we Sizwe, a president of the African National Congress, a leader and a comrade who had dedicated his life to the liberation of his people, they believe should go back to prison. Now, of course, they play games. They know that this judgment is not sustainable if they truly send President Jacob Zuma back to prison. So they say, well, we recommend that the period that he served under medical parole should be taken into consideration by the Department of Correctional Services. We also say that the advisory panel does not have the ultimate dictatorial say, as it was tried to be advanced by previous justices. So they basically say what President Zuma and his legal team said is correct. But even although they have to acknowledge that, because they truly have no other option, because otherwise they would set such a bad legal precedent that it will blow them right out of the water. After that, they say, no, we do not grant President Zuma his appeal. It is dismissed. Because they cannot get themselves so far as to give President Zuma any chance of being able to claim victory. My dear comrades, that is the pettiness, that is the pathetic level at which our judicial system has plunged into the depths, scraping the bottom of the barrel. Now, there are those of us who over a considerable period of time have said that our courts and our judicial system has been captured. There are those of us who've asked the serious questions about why is it so important for the judges in the Gauteng North High Court to seal the CR17 bank statements, almost seal it at every cost, in desperation. And we have to ask, are not some of the answers in the actions that we've seen today? In this constitutional court judgment, granting a killer, a wanton killer, a person who brought this country to the precipice of disaster and of civil war, granting him parole, is not some of the answer of the manner in which President Zuma's medical parole matter and the appeal that he launched is dismissed. Is it not hiding there inside the CR17 bank statements? I believe that that is very probably the case. And as long as Cyril Ramaphosa and his fellow lawyers who support him, who go out of their way to support him, who even declare in some of their judgments that he is the greatest salvation that had been brought to South Africa, as long as Mr. Justice Zondo, who went out of his way also in the report of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture to say that Ramaphosa saved the country, is the savior against so-called state capture. Is it not that the answer for these people's conduct and behavior is now well hidden away by their own legal rulings, by their bending of the law in order to keep at all and every cost those CR17 bank statements closed? Because we know that there are many of those in the legal fraternity, also including judges, that have received money from Cyril Ramaphosa, and that those names are hidden there, are sealed there in those CR17 bank statements. This is the sad reality that we are faced with on this Monday, the 20th of November, in our beloved country. more than 28 years after our country went through all the pains and even the painful compromises of trying to bring about peace, of making compromises that were entirely unpalatable at Cde in the interim and even in the final constitution, we have to say to each other, it has gone too far. Our nation has been betrayed. Our people's dignity, in fact, our whole nationhood, is now at stake. We have to say to each other, this cannot be allowed to continue. We cannot face another day of shame like this, where we literally see people who call themselves members of the African National Congress, people who call themselves so-called comrades, judges who are in positions of power only because of the blood and the sweat and the tears of our liberation fighters, of the people of this country who fought for their own liberation and who sacrificed everything, who are only in those positions because it has been made possible by those sacrifices, have spat in our faces. It cannot be continued. It cannot be tolerated. We cannot allow this indignation, this absolute rejection of all that we stood for and the whole history of the African National Congress since its formation in 1912 in the Wauchope Methodist Church in Mangaung. We cannot allow it to continue. So we must end it. And it must end soon and fast. There is an opportunity to do so in the upcoming 55th National Conference of the ANC. But even in the run-up to that very seminal conference, we have to take all the required action within the parameters of our legal system and in a commitment to the democratic rights that we have fought for and for which some of our fellow comrades have laid their lives down for, to make sure that Cyril Ramaphosa and the mafia gang that has taken over, not just within the African National Congress, not just within the executive, within the cabinet of the government of South Africa, but also in the judiciary and right up to the Constitutional Court, must go. And once they go, we will have to make sure that they face the consequences of their actions, that we will bring the law to them and make them face up to that law and make them pay the price of their treachery. Because what we have seen today is nothing else but treason. And it should not be called by some sweet little other words. It should not be sugar-coated. It is treason. And it being treason, it has to be dealt with without compromise and harshly. As I've said before, Cyril Ramaphosa should move from the union buildings, from the seat of government, where he is now in the office of the President of the Republic of South Africa, straight down the road to Kgosi Mampuru prison, where he deserves truly to be. So, my dear friends and comrades, on this sad evening, where we have witnessed the ultimate betrayal of one of the greatest liberation heroes of our struggle, Comrade Chris Hani, where we've seen the betrayal of the life that he laid down, where we remember how his body lay broken there in the driveway of his residence, where we remember all the people who've sacrificed their lives. We say to each other, Aikale, the time has come. Enough is enough. Now is the time for action. Let the righteous, indignant flames of our anger burn in our souls and be carried forward in the words that we express without fear and without favor, that this betrayal cannot be left unchallenged and ultimately unpunished. I greet you with a heavy heart, but with a full commitment that our liberation struggle must continue, that our commitment to bring the desired change that our people sacrificed over the 110 and more years of the existence of the African National Congress, that we must bring that liberation, regardless of what the sacrifices are that we have to face now. No matter what the sacrifices are, my dear comrades, even if it's going to cost our lives, no matter what the pain is that will again be inflicted on us, similar to the pain that the apartheid regime and its terrible repressive apparatuses inflicted against us. We will not waver. We will not give in. We will continue. I was a young man of 23 when I stood in the dock in the Johannesburg South, then it wasn't called Gauteng, but Johannesburg South High Court, that court in Pritchard Street. And I was asked by the prosecutor, one Mr. Prinsloo, whether I will continue to fight and attack the apartheid regime. And I said yes. I said yes. I was then asked, will I continue to fight also by planting bombs on behalf of the African National Congress and of Umkhonto we Sizwe? And I said yes. I was asked if I get a chance to destroy and kill the leaders of the National Apartheid Party government, including the then President P.W. Botha. I said yes. Mr. Justice Meyerberg, a very conservative right-wing kangaroo court judge, a racist judge that could just as well have operated within Nazi Germany, shouted at me, young man, you better count your words because you are charged with treason and I may just decide to hang you because for treason there is the possibility of the death sentence. And I turned towards him and I said, Your Honor, suit yourself. So that's the message, my concluding message that I delivered tonight to Cyril Ramaphosa and any of those who will try to attack us and intimidate us, will try to destroy our lives because we stand up for justice. Mr. Ramaphosa, yes, I call you Mr., I don't call you comrade. Mr. Ramaphosa, suit yourself. But I will not allow you and your government and your judges and your Constitutional Court Chief Justice that you've appointed against all odds to besmirch the name of one of the greatest liberation fighters in the history of the African National Congress, Cde Chris Hani. And nor should we allow you to continue your vindictive, pathetic persecution of President Jacob Zuma. The time has come. The end is now. We will not allow it to continue. Aluta continua.